1 year ago, a young mother in Colorado watched her world collapse when her daughter vanished without a trace after a mysterious car crash. Authorities believed it was a tragic accident, until new evidence suggested something far more sinister: a staged disappearance, a hidden cabin, and a brother who vanished into the mountains. But when a forgotten post-it note and a single phone number surfaced, the truth that emerged was darker and more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Before we uncover this shocking story of lies, betrayal, and a mother's relentless search for her daughter, let us know where you're watching from. And if you want more true stories like this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss an episode. When 5-year-old Annie Carter's father picked her up from kindergarten that Friday afternoon, it was supposed to be routine, a simple custody weekend, another attempt at normalcy after a messy divorce. But by nightfall, everything changed. His SUV was found crushed against a line of pines off a remote Colorado highway, a place he had no reason to be. He survived. Annie didn't, or so everyone believed. The crash was violent, the kind that twisted metal and time alike. When Ryan Carter woke in the hospital, his mind was blank. No memory of the drive, the accident, or his daughter's final moments. Doctors called it total retrograde amnesia. Investigators called it a mystery. For a year, the case hung in limbo between two theories: a tragic accident or a violent carjacking gone wrong. But neither explained why a 5-year-old girl could vanish without a single trace. Exactly 1 year later, Leah Carter stood inside the hollow shell of her old life, the Denver home she and Ryan had once dreamed would raise a family. The place smelled of bleach, sharp and chemical, as if someone had tried to scrub away the memories clinging to the drywall. Sunlight poured through bare windows, cutting harsh squares across the empty hardwood. It wasn't peace she felt. It was the suffocating kind of silence that follows catastrophe. Downstairs, the realtor's cheerful voice echoed faintly, finalizing the sale to a young couple brimming with hope. Hope Leah could no longer recognize. Closing day. The word felt cruel, like a verdict. This house had been her last tie to Annie, and now it too would be gone. A year of waiting, of interviews, vigils, and whispers from neighbors who didn't know what to say. A year of gray mornings and sleepless nights replaying the same loop in her mind. Annie's little figure running from the school doors, that black backpack patterned with pink hearts bouncing behind her, her golden hair catching the afternoon light. Leah could still see Ryan's SUV pulling away at 3:15 p.m., a moment frozen in time, captured on a grainy security feed. By evening, the car was wrecked 50 miles away. Ryan lived. Annie vanished. No footprints. No torn fabric. No clues. Just the impossible quiet of the mountains swallowing a child whole. Leah pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to hold herself together inside this echo of a home. This was supposed to be closure. Instead, it felt like stepping off a cliff. She moved through the empty rooms one last time, a ghost performing a final ritual, until she reached the master closet. It used to be Ryan's project, meticulously built when life still felt stable. Now it was bare, its bones showing, the faint scent of bleach clinging to the air. Then her phone buzzed. For a second she thought it was the realtor, probably calling her downstairs to sign the papers. But when she looked at the screen, her heart stopped. It wasn't a call, it was a notification. Annie's backpack detected nearby. The same backpack that had vanished the day her daughter did, the same one that was supposed to be gone forever. A white notification bubble blinked on her lock screen, clean, clinical, almost innocent against the photo of Annie smiling in the sun. That same photo Leah looked at every morning, both a wound and a lifeline. But this alert wasn't ordinary. Annie's backpack detected nearby. For a heartbeat, everything inside her stopped. Her lungs forgot how to breathe. The silence roared in her ears like a wave collapsing. That AirTag, she'd slipped it into the lining of her daughter's backpack months before the disappearance. One of those quiet safety measures every anxious parent justified to themselves. A small circle of metal and hope. It hadn't pinged once since the day Annie vanished. Police helicopters had scoured the mountains for its signal. Nothing. They'd called it dead. Battery drained, device destroyed. But it was here. Now. Leah's hands trembled as she unlocked her phone. The screen swam in and out of focus through her tears, the tracking app spinning, connecting. Then a green dot appeared, a pulsing, nauseating shade of green that meant life, meant proximity. The arrow on the screen pointed forward. Her pulse surged in her ears. She took a step into the walk-in closet. Each breath grew shallower, the air thick and cold as if the house itself was holding its breath. 20 feet ahead. The green arrow blinked, pulling her deeper into the silence. The world had shrunk to the glow of that small screen to a single question. How could it be here? She reached the back wall, pressing her palm to the smooth, cold, dry wall. The app recalculated. 12 feet. Then it turned sharply right. 9 feet. Down. Leah froze, staring at the polished floorboards gleaming beneath the light. The signal was strong, unwavering. Not behind the wall. Not in the room below. Directly under her. It didn't make sense. She'd stood in this closet 100 times, packing, crying, cleaning. But never right here, never with the phone in her hand. Maybe the signal had been dormant all along, waiting for her to come close, enough to wake it. She dropped to her knees, fingers skimming the floor for seams or cracks. Nothing but smooth, cold wood and the faint thrum of the app's green pulse. Hope and terror braided together inside her chest until she thought she might burst. That's when a half-buried memory surfaced. Ryan, years ago, prying up these very boards to install a secret compartment. A just in case, safe spot for cash, passports, things he didn't trust banks with. She'd rolled her eyes back then, thinking it was another symptom of his growing paranoia. Now, her heart pounded with the memory. She found the faint seam where 2 boards met. Pressed. Nothing. Scraped her nails along the edge until they caught. The wood resisted, sealed tight by years of dust and the slow settling of the house. Then, downstairs, a voice cut through the silence. "Leah, they're here." Brenda's chipper tone shattered the moment like glass. The buyers, the closing. Her chance to uncover the truth was slipping away. Leah shot to her feet, panic spiking through her veins. If she didn't act now, strangers would own this house by sundown, and whatever was hidden beneath her feet would be lost forever. Without thinking, she bolted for the stairs, her footsteps pounding through the empty rooms, echoing like gunfire in a tomb. Leah tore down the stairs, nearly colliding with Brenda in the foyer. The realtor's trademark smile faltered as she took in Leah's wild eyes and ashen face. "Leah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," Brenda asked, concern flickering beneath her chipper tone. "I forgot something," Leah muttered, barely slowing as she brushed past her. She didn't meet Brenda's eyes, didn't acknowledge the young couple standing by the door, smiling, nervous, ready to claim a home that still throbbed with secrets. In the garage, the smell of gasoline and concrete dust clung to the air, a ghost of the life she'd already packed away. The space was stripped bare except for a few forgotten tools in the corner, one of them a crowbar, old and rusted but solid. The sight of it steadied her, the weight of the metal grounding her panic in something real. She grabbed it. By the time she reached the stairs again, adrenaline had taken full control. Her legs moved on instinct, her heart pounding loud enough to drown out Brenda's confused voice behind her. 2 steps at a time, up, 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 until she burst back into the master bedroom, the phone in her hand flashing its relentless green pulse. Here, here, here. Leah dropped to her knees, jammed the crowbar into the seam between the boards, and pulled. The wood resisted, groaning under the strain. Splinters flew as she threw her weight into it, her muscles trembling, teeth gritted. The sound was violent, raw, jagged, final. Footsteps thudded below her. Voices called her name. She ignored them, repositioned the bar, and pried again. The second pull ripped through the silence like thunder. Then, crack. The board gave way, swinging upward on invisible hinges, revealing a narrow crawl space hidden beneath the floor. The stale air that rose up smelled of dust, metal, and something older, something wrong. Leah's hands shook as she switched her phone to flashlight mode. The beam cut through the swirling dust, catching the glint of pipes and the rough concrete below. Her heart hammered in her throat. And then she saw it. Tucked against a support beam, half covered by insulation, was a small black backpack. The one with pink hearts. Her breath caught. The crowbar slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor, the sound echoing like gunfire in the hollow house. She reached into the opening, her arm brushing cobwebs, fingers trembling as they closed around the soft canvas fabric. When she pulled it free, the weight was shockingly light, almost fragile. Leah's throat tightened. Her fingers fumbled with the zipper. Inside lay Annie's lunchbox, empty, the faint smell of peanut butter and dust still clinging to it, and a crumpled drawing of a butterfly. The paper was faded, edges torn, but the colors were still bright, still alive. The world tilted around her. The official story, the accident, the carjacking, the endless explanations, crumbled in her mind like brittle ash. If the backpack was here, then Ryan hadn't driven straight to the mountains. He'd come home, and he'd lied about everything. The implications hit Leah like a cold wave, sharp, staggering, impossible to ignore. The amnesia, the confusion, Ryan's wide-eyed helplessness, it all began to crumble in her mind, each detail twisting into something darker. What if it wasn't memory loss at all? What if it was theater, a performance designed to hide the truth? Her flashlight beam swept across the crawl space again, cutting through layers of dust and insulation. Then something metallic caught the light, a dull glint buried deeper in the corner. The insulation there looked disturbed, pushed aside. Someone had been down here. Leah reached in, her arm scraping against splintered wood, stretching until her fingertips brushed something hard. She gritted her teeth and pulled. When it came free, her heart dropped. It was a metal lockbox, dark gray, heavy, the same kind Ryan used for his emergency funds. She tried the latch. It clicked open easily. Empty. For a moment, she just stared. Then the realization crashed over her. That box was supposed to hold several $1,000s, cash Ryan had hidden from her, from the divorce lawyers, from everyone. His gambling stash. He hadn't just come back here. He'd come for this. The backpack wasn't lost. It was left behind, a casualty of his rush to grab the money and run. But then what? The crash? The disappearance? Had it all been part of a plan spiraling out of control? Leah, what on earth is going on up here? Brenda's voice snapped through the haze. She stood in the doorway, the young buyers peeking nervously behind her, their polite smiles dissolving into unease. Leah turned toward them, clutching the backpack in one hand and the empty lockbox in the other. Her face was pale, her expression hollow. "The sale's off," she said quietly, her voice stripped of emotion. "Get out of my house. I need to call the police." 45 minutes later, the house was crawling with people in gloves and badges. Floodlights glared against the walls. Evidence markers dotted the floor like scars. Detective Alan Merrick arrived last. A man in his late 50s, with weary eyes and the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen too many tragedies turn cold. Leah knew him well. He'd been there in the early days, when her hope still had edges. Now, he found her sitting on the stairs, pale and trembling, the backpack and lockbox beside her like offerings to a truth she wasn't ready to face. She told him everything, about the AirTag, the hidden compartment, the missing cash, the realization that Ryan had been here that day. Her words spilled out in fragments, driven by adrenaline and grief. "It means he was here, Detective," she said, her voice cracking. "Ryan came back. He brought Annie here. He lied about everything." Merrick listened silently, his lined face unreadable. Then he stood, motioned for his team, and climbed the stairs. Leah watched him disappear into the master closet, the forensics team already swarming over the scene, dusting, photographing, cataloging. Their quiet professionalism clashed with the chaos in her chest. When Merrick returned, his expression was measured, cautious. "I understand why this feels like a breakthrough, Leah," he said softly. "And it is. It confirms Ryan stopped here after leaving the school." He paused, his gaze steady but heavy with unspoken warning. "But we can't jump ahead of the evidence. We follow facts, not feelings." He explained why the house had never been searched. Ryan had officially moved out 2 weeks before the crash, the divorce finalized, their lives legally divided. Every piece of data, the traffic cams, witness reports, GPS records, had placed him on that mountain road. There'd been no reason to look here. At the time, it had made sense. Now, it felt like the single mistake that had doomed everything. "The backpack confirms he stopped here," Merrick admitted finally, his tone softening just enough to sound human. "And the empty lockbox suggests he took the cash. That explains why he detoured, but not what happened after. It doesn't tell us where Annie is." Leah stared at him, stunned. The fragile spark of hope that had flared in her chest wavered, threatened to die out. "You think this means nothing?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "The amnesia, the confusion, it was all an act. He planned this." Merrick's eyes flickered with sympathy, but his words were measured. "Or the crash could have been real," he countered gently. "He might have been distracted, upset, or maybe your carjacking theory still fits. Whoever took Annie could have forced him to stop for the cash first. We don't know yet. We can't assume anything." It was the kind of calm, logical talk meant to soothe, to manage expectations, but Leah didn't want managing. She wanted justice. Merrick went on, voice low and deliberate. "Ryan's amnesia defense is solid. We have medical documentation, neurologists even. They'll testify that his memory loss is real. Proving otherwise would be almost impossible. Medically and legally, it's a fortress." That word lodged in Leah's mind. Fortress. A fortress built of lies, protected by the very system that had failed her daughter. "So what now?" she asked, her voice flat, the tremor gone, replaced by something harder. "Now we process the scene," Merrick said, gesturing toward the team in the closet. Gloves, cameras, hushed voices. "We'll analyze the backpack, check for DNA or trace evidence. We'll review the timeline again, maybe even re-interview Ryan, see if this jogs something loose. We'll follow the evidence, Leah, wherever it leads." But she knew what that meant. They'd ask Ryan. He'd stare blankly, say he didn't remember, and everything would stall again, buried under red tape and cautious procedure. The police were bound by rules. Leah wasn't. She rose slowly, clutching the strap of the recovered backpack. The grief that had once paralyzed her began to harden, sharpen, transform into something dangerous. If no one else would pull down the fortress, she would. By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking, but not from fear. The drive to the long-term care facility blurred past in streaks of gray highway and smudged light. Her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, the tension in her arms matching the fury boiling in her chest. They all pitied Ryan, the poor father, the victim of trauma, the man who lost everything. But Leah remembered the lies, the gambling, the hidden debts, the quiet manipulation that had eroded their marriage long before the crash. Ryan Carter had always been good at pretending. The Mountain View Rehabilitation Center loomed at the edge of the city, a cold, sterile building that reeked of antiseptic and loneliness. Inside, the halls were hushed, the air thick with the faint scent of overcooked cafeteria food and disinfectant. The only sounds were the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional mechanical beep of a monitor. This was where Ryan had lived for the past year, recovering from his injuries. A fractured leg, lingering pain, and a conveniently persistent fog of memory loss. Leah walked down the corridor, her heartbeat steady now. Every step brought her closer to the man who held the answers, and to the truth she was no longer afraid to face. Ryan needed help with everything now, or at least that was the story. His dependence was his armor, a convenient shield against questions too sharp to answer. It was the perfect disguise, helplessness as absolution. Leah's footsteps echoed down the sterile hallway, each step hard and deliberate against the linoleum. The scent of antiseptic hung in the air, mingling with something faintly metallic and old, like forgotten regret. She found him in the common room, a bright, sunlit space with oversized windows that looked out onto a perfectly trimmed lawn. The view was beautiful, almost cruel in its serenity, a mockery of the cage he had built for himself. Ryan sat by the glass, slouched in his wheelchair, a blanket draped neatly across his lap. His face was pale, almost translucent. The confident man she'd once known hollowed out into something smaller. The charm was gone, replaced by that vacant, glassy stare he'd perfected. To anyone else, he looked broken. To Leah, he looked rehearsed. She approached without hesitation, her figure cutting a shadow across his face. For a split second, his expression faltered, the faintest flicker of recognition, of guilt, before the mask slid back into place. "Leah," he said carefully, voice hesitant, the performance beginning. "What are you doing here?" She didn't bother with small talk, didn't sit. She stayed standing, forcing him to look up at her. "I was at the house," she said evenly, "finishing the sale, saying goodbye." He flinched at that, just slightly. "Yeah, I heard it sold. That's good. You deserve a fresh start." The words were soft, mechanical, hollow. "I found the backpack," Leah said. Ryan blinked, his face rearranging itself into confusion, eyes widening in perfect bewilderment. "The backpack? I don't understand. What backpack?" "Annie's backpack," she said, her tone like ice. "The black one with the pink hearts. The one she had when you picked her up that day. I found it in the house, under the floorboards." Something shifted in him then, a tremor in his hands. His breath came shallow. His eyes darted away, searching the corners of the room like a trapped animal. I don't remember going back to the house," he stammered. "You know that. I don't remember anything from that day. The doctors said—" "I also found the lockbox," Leah cut in, her voice rising slightly. "The one you used to hide your cash. It was empty." And there it was, the tell, a flicker, a tightening around his eyes, a second of stillness too controlled. It wasn't confusion or pain, it was panic, pure, unmistakable panic. Then it was gone. His face crumpled, his voice broke. "The cash? Why would I? Leah, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't remember the crash. I don't remember anything. I don't know where she is." The volume of his voice drew attention. A nurse hurried over, concern etched across her face. "Mr. Harding, are you all right? Is everything okay here?" Ryan seized the opportunity, turning toward her, his distress amplifying into full-blown hysteria. "She's upsetting me," he cried, voice cracking. "She's confusing me. I can't remember. Please make her leave." He buried his face in his hand, shoulders shaking with perfectly timed sobs. Leah didn't flinch. She didn't buy it. Not anymore. "He's fine," she said flatly to the nurse, her tone cold, almost detached. "He just remembered something." For the first time in a year, she knew, without question, that Ryan Carter wasn't broken. He was hiding, and she was going to tear down every wall he'd built until she found what was left of the truth. Leah didn't look back. She walked straight through the double doors of the facility, the blast of cold air outside cutting through her like truth. Behind her, Ryan sat bathed in sunlight, his mask perfectly restored, the picture of fragility. But Leah knew what lay beneath that fragile veneer. Calculation, deceit, darkness. The confrontation hadn't given her a confession. There were no dramatic revelations, no emotional collapse, no sudden flash of guilt. What it gave her was far more valuable: certainty. Absolute, unshakable certainty that Ryan Carter's amnesia was a lie. And if it was a lie, then he knew where Annie was. That realization was both a blade and a lifeline. It carved through the fog of grief that had smothered her for a year, replacing despair with purpose. If the crash was staged, if the detour to the house was deliberate, then every detail of that day had meaning. The backpack was proof. The timeline would be the key that unlocked everything. The next morning broke pale and cold. The sky stretched thin and colorless over Denver. Leah drove to Little Sprouts Learning Center, the kindergarten she hadn't been able to visit since Annie vanished. Just seeing the building made her stomach twist. The bright murals, the swing set, the tiny handprints painted on the fence. It was all too cheerful, too alive. The sign out front with its cartoon sprouts and smiling sun felt like mockery. Inside, Ms. Gable, Annie's teacher, greeted her with quiet compassion. She still carried the shadow of that tragedy in her eyes, though her voice remained steady. Leah explained what she'd found: the backpack, the lockbox, the new questions that haunted her. "I need to be sure," Leah said. "Was Annie wearing the backpack when Ryan picked her up that day?" "Yes," Ms. Gable said immediately, her voice soft but firm. "Absolutely. She never took it off. She was so proud of it. I remember helping her zip it up myself. She wanted to show her dad the drawing she made. The butterfly." At the mention of the drawing, Leah's chest tightened. Ms. Gable's expression darkened slightly as the memory shifted. "He was in a hurry," she continued. "Agitated. Barely said goodbye. I thought it was just stress, divorce, money problems. But now—" She trailed off, shaking her head. Leah's mind raced, stressed, agitated. Not a father excited for a weekend with his daughter, a man rushing to tie up loose ends. "Do you still have the security footage from that day?" Leah asked. The teacher hesitated, then nodded. "It's archived. Everything's backed up on a cloud server. I can get it for you." An hour later, Leah sat in the small, cluttered office that smelled faintly of crayons and paste. The soft hum of the old computer filled the silence as the footage loaded. Then the video flickered to life, grainy but clear enough. There they were. Ryan, striding across the lot, jaw tight, hand on Annie's shoulder. His movements were quick, controlled, almost mechanical. And beside him, Annie, skipping, innocent, her tiny black backpack bouncing with each step, the pink hearts catching the afternoon light. The timestamp read 3:15 p.m. Leah leaned closer, studying every frame. The tension in Ryan's shoulders, the way his eyes darted, scanning the lot like a man who didn't want to be seen. He wasn't just distracted, he was watching. And Annie, her trust absolute, followed him without hesitation. Leah watched the footage again and again, until her eyes burned. That image, father and daughter walking out of frame together, had always marked the end of the story. But now, Leah knew it wasn't an ending. It was the first move in a carefully constructed lie. The contrast between the images on that screen and the truth now burning in her chest was almost too much to bear. Leah drove home with her mind spinning, the puzzle pieces of that day rearranging into a map of betrayal. She opened her laptop, fingers trembling as she pulled up Google Maps. The route from Little Sprouts Learning Center to the crash site stretched before her in the cold blue glow of the screen. 45 minutes. Even in traffic, it was a straightforward drive, a single clean line from the suburbs into the mountains. Then she turned to the police files spread across her dining table, the same ones she had read and reread through countless sleepless nights. The crash had been reported at 6:05 p.m. A passing driver had spotted the wreck and called it in. 3 hours. Nearly 3 hours between the time Ryan left the school and the crash. Leah did the math again, this time with new eyes. The stop at the house explained some of it. A 20-minute drive from the school in the opposite direction of the mountains, maybe 30 minutes inside the house to access the crawl space and grab the money. That accounted for about an hour and a half total. But that still left 90 minutes unaccounted for. 90 minutes in which her daughter simply vanished. The more she studied it, the clearer it became. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't chance. It was deliberate. Every detour, every pause, every unexplained gap, planned, calculated, controlled. Ryan had time. Time to take the money. Time to drive somewhere else. Time to make Annie disappear. The thought chilled her to her core. If the crash was staged, the question wasn't just how, it was why. Leah leaned back, her eyes blurring over the timeline scrawled across the page. The answer didn't lie in the root. It lay in Ryan's past, in the tangle of lies and debts that had destroyed their marriage long before the accident. It had all started small. A poker game with coworkers, a sports bet here and there. At first, it seemed harmless, Ryan's way of blowing off steam after long work days. But over the years, it had morphed into something darker, more consuming. His phone always buzzing, his eyes glued to betting apps, his paychecks vanishing faster than explanations could be offered. By the time Leah filed for divorce, the man she had loved was gone, replaced by someone desperate, erratic, dangerous. The debts were no longer personal, they were predatory. He owed money to people who didn't forgive and didn't forget. If Annie's disappearance was tied to that debt, Leah needed proof, something tangible. She picked up her phone and called Sarah Jenkins, her divorce attorney. Sarah was everything Ryan wasn't: sharp, disciplined, relentless. She'd seen through his charm from day one, dissecting his finances with surgical precision. When Leah explained the new discoveries, the backpack, the lockbox, the missing cash, Sarah didn't sound surprised, just grim. "Come to my office," she said. "There's something you need to see." A few hours later, Leah sat across from her in a sleek conference room high above downtown Denver. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, glittering and vast, a world that seemed impossibly distant from Leah's shattered one. On the table between them lay a stack of folders, bank statements, credit reports, and legal documents. It looked like the bones of a man's double life. "When you told me about the backpack," Sarah began, "I went back through the records we didn't touch during the divorce, the accounts we froze, the ones Ryan fought hardest to keep private." She exhaled, the weight of what she was about to say heavy in her eyes. "Leah, I think Ryan's debts were far worse than we realized." She slid a document across the table. "And I don't think he was gambling alone." Sarah's tone had shifted. Gone was the crisp professionalism of a seasoned attorney. What replaced it was something graver, something heavy enough to silence the hum of the city outside the glass walls. "We didn't need to untangle every debt during the divorce," she began carefully. "Just the ones that impacted the marital estate. We knew it was bad, Leah, but I didn't realize how bad." She turned the file toward Leah, her manicured finger landing on a column of wire transfers. The numbers hit like a punch to the gut. 5 figures, 6 figures, money, funneling out of accounts in steady, desperate bursts, tens of thousands disappearing into digital nothingness. Leah stared, dizzy. Where did it all go? "Nowhere legitimate," Sarah said grimly. Ryan was juggling everything, borrowing from one lender to pay off another. He was running a personal Ponzi scheme just to stay afloat. He maxed out every credit card, took out payday loans, cashed out retirement accounts. He even forged your signature on a few applications. Leah's breath caught. "He what?" Sarah's eyes softened. "He was desperate, Leah, and desperate people are capable of anything." Leah's gaze swept over the paperwork again. The chaos translated into numbers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Years of deception hiding beneath the illusion of normalcy. Her marriage hadn't been built on trust. It had been built on a ticking bomb. "But who did he owe?" she asked quietly. "The banks? Credit cards? The IRS?" Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "That's the problem," she said softly. "Most of this debt isn't institutional." Leah frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's private." Sarah flipped to a different page. A forensic accounting summary, dense with legal and financial jargon. She tapped a paragraph near the bottom. These wire transfers, most trace back to shell companies and offshore accounts designed to hide ownership. It's not corporate debt, it's shadow debt. Leah blinked, her mouth dry. Shadow debt? Money borrowed from people who don't file tax returns, Sarah said quietly. People who collect through other means. The words lingered in the sterile air, heavy and final. Leah felt the temperature in the room drop. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. You're saying— Yes, Sarah interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. Loan sharks. Organized crime. The phrase landed like a physical blow. Leah gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. It sounded unreal, like something ripped from a late-night movie. But Sarah's expression, tight, pale, haunted, was anything but cinematic. How do you know that? Leah asked, her voice trembling. Sarah took a slow breath, her eyes flickering toward the window before returning to Leah. Because they contacted me. The room seemed to tilt. When we started digging during the divorce, subpoenaing shell corporations, asking questions about those offshore accounts, someone didn't like it. I got calls, emails, threats. She hesitated, the words scraping out like confession. They knew details about me, about my family. I took them seriously. I pulled back. I focused on finalizing your settlement, on keeping you and Annie out of it. Leah could barely process it. You were threatened? And you didn't tell me? I thought once the divorce was done, you'd be safe, Sarah said softly, guilt flooding her voice. I thought the danger would pass when you weren't tied to him anymore. But Leah's mind was already moving ahead, connecting threads faster than fear could stop her. If Ryan had owed money to organized criminals, and if he'd been desperate enough to fake amnesia, to stage a crash, then Annie's disappearance wasn't random. It was collateral. And Leah finally understood. She wasn't chasing a mystery anymore. She was walking straight into a war. ChatGPT said. Sarah leaned forward, her voice lowering to a near whisper. They weren't subtle, Leah. The threats were explicit. Her gaze locked with Leah's, and the seriousness in her tone made the air in the room thicken. They warned me to stop investigating Ryan's finances. They said if I didn't, they'd go after him. And not just him. She paused. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then she said it. They threatened Annie. The words hit Leah like a body blow. Her stomach dropped, the blood draining from her face as the Denver skyline outside blurred into a wash of color. For a year, her fears had lived in the abstract. Vague shadows she could never quite touch. But this was real. Tangible. Deadly. Suddenly, everything snapped into focus. The crash, the amnesia, the silence. Ryan wasn't just running from the police. He was hiding from the people he owed. The realization carved a jagged line through Leah's chest. If they threatened her, she said slowly, her voice trembling, then maybe they took her. Maybe the carjacking theory was right. Maybe they forced him to crash. Maybe— It's possible, Sarah said, cutting in softly. But then, why no ransom? Why fake amnesia? Why stay silent? Leah had no answer. The puzzle was only deepening. If Ryan had been trying to protect Annie, why put her in danger in the first place? Why bury the truth under lies? Sarah was still rifling through the files, flipping pages like someone chasing ghosts. Wait, she murmured. There's something else. She pulled a single yellow sticky note from between a stack of old bank statements. The flimsy square looked absurdly small amid the mountain of legal paper, but Leah felt her pulse quicken the moment she saw it. On it, scrawled in Ryan's familiar, hurried handwriting, were 10 digits. No name, no label, just a number. This doesn't match any of his listed contacts, Sarah said, sliding it across the table. Could be a business contact, a dead lead, maybe nothing at all. But given what we know now, she hesitated. It feels like a thread worth pulling. Leah stared at the note, the paper soft and thin beneath her fingers, and yet it felt heavy. Like evidence, like truth. A tiny fragment of Ryan's secret life. A piece of the dark machinery that had swallowed her daughter whole. She didn't call it in, she drove straight to the station. The mention of organized crime changed everything. Detective Merrick's calm, pragmatic exterior hardened into sharp focus the instant she told him. The sterile interview room suddenly felt charged, electric. He listened intently, every trace of skepticism gone. When she handed him the sticky note, he didn't hesitate. He sealed it into an evidence bag with deliberate care, his tone clipped and precise. We'll trace the number. Cross-reference it with the financial records and the threats your attorney received. If this ties to organized debt collectors, it could give us motive and context. Hours later, Leah's phone rang. Merrick's voice was tense. Come back to the station. When she arrived, he was waiting behind his cluttered desk, a cup of untouched coffee going cold beside a pile of files. The light overhead was harsh, making the shadows under his eyes look deeper. We ran the number, he said. It's a burner phone, bought with cash at a convenience store in Denver 2 weeks before the disappearance. It was active for only a short time. Went dead the day after the crash. Totally untraceable. He turned the monitor toward her. But there's something else. The call logs. The data on the screen was sparse but chilling. A trail of short, frantic calls made in the final days before everything fell apart. Ryan's phone contacted this number repeatedly, Merrick said, pointing to a line of digits glowing on the screen. And whoever he was calling wasn't just one person. He clicked again, and another number appeared beneath it. Then another. 2 other phones, he continued, his voice low. Both burners. All 3 were active at the same time, for the same brief window before the crash. Whoever Ryan was talking to, they were organized, coordinated. Leah leaned closer, her pulse thudding in her ears. Who are they? Merrick's expression darkened. That's what we're trying to find out. This one, Merrick said, tapping the first line of numbers on the screen. We traced to a known enforcer for the gambling syndicate Ryan owed money to. His name's Victor Novak. He exhaled heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He's bad news, Leah. Very bad. Violent, careful, connected to a larger organization we've been trying to crack for years. He's the kind of man who doesn't threaten. He delivers. Leah's stomach twisted into a hard, cold knot. The fear she'd carried for a year finally had a name. Victor Novak. A name that felt heavy in her mouth, sharp as glass. And the second number? She managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Merrick hesitated, clicking through the file until a new set of digits appeared. The second one's another burner, he said. Registered under the name Arthur Dent. Fake, obviously. It was purchased at the same convenience store as Novak's. Same clerk, same day. Whoever these men were, they were coordinating. He turned the monitor toward her, displaying a digital map filled with blinking coordinates. This phone pinged multiple times before it went dead. The signal's been triangulated to a remote area near Gunnison National Forest, southwest Colorado. It's rugged terrain, dense forest, canyons, old logging roads. The kind of place where someone could disappear forever. Leah leaned forward, eyes wide. And it went dead the same day as Novak's? Merrick nodded. The day after the crash. The implications crashed over her all at once. So, Ryan was talking to Novak, the man threatening his daughter, and at the same time to this Arthur Dent in the mountains? Exactly, Merrick said. It forms a triangle. Ryan caught between an enforcer in the city and an unknown contact off the grid. Whatever he was doing, it wasn't random. He was moving between 2 worlds, criminal and civilian, and trying to keep both from colliding. Leah's voice shook. What if this Dent person wasn't part of it? What if he was helping Ryan? Maybe he helped hide Annie, kept her safe somewhere Novak couldn't find her. Merrick's pragmatic calm returned, but his expression stayed grave. Or maybe Dent was part of the extortion, he said. Maybe Novak forced Ryan to make contact with him as part of the payoff. We can't assume loyalty or motive until we know who this man is, but it changes everything. This isn't just a missing person case anymore. It's organized kidnapping, extortion, conspiracy. Ryan wasn't innocent. He was in the middle of something far more dangerous than he could control. The weight of his words pressed down on her chest. For months, she'd feared the unknown. Now she feared what was known. Victor Novak wasn't a ghost story. He was real. A man whose name appeared in sealed case files and federal briefings. A man who used fear as a weapon and violence as punctuation. The thought of him, the kind of person who could threaten a child, haunted Leah's mind. But as her panic settled, something sharper began to form beneath it. Focus. If Ryan was in contact with two people, Novak in Denver and Dent near Gunnison, then the truth about Annie's disappearance was somewhere between them. Leah stared at the map glowing on the screen, at the cluster of pings deep in the forest. "What if that's where she is?" she whispered. Merrick didn't answer. His silence said enough. And in that silence, Leah made a decision. If the police were moving slowly, if procedure and red tape would drag this case through months of analysis, she couldn't wait. She wouldn't. Ryan's secrets had led Annie into the wilderness, and Leah Harding was going to follow them there. Leah stood frozen in the middle of her apartment, the theory pulsing in her mind like an electric current. It was insane, outrageous, but it fit. Every inconsistency, every contradiction, every unanswered question suddenly aligned with chilling precision. Ryan wasn't just a desperate gambler cornered by his debts. He was a man orchestrating a vanishing act. Her breath caught as the realization solidified. The crash wasn't an accident. It was a smokescreen. The car, the wreck, the trauma. It was all part of a cover story designed to make one thing appear true, that Anukika was gone forever. But what if she wasn't? What if Ryan had hidden her, tucked her away somewhere safe, under the protection of the only person he could trust, the only person capable of disappearing completely? Jesse Calloway. The name hit Leah like a whisper from the past, dragging her back to a wedding long ago. She remembered him standing in the back of the room, broad-shouldered, silent, with eyes that saw too much. There had been something about him, something unyielding. While Ryan worked the crowd with charm and easy laughter, Jesse had hovered in the background, restless and uncomfortable, like a man allergic to civilization itself. Ryan's estranged brother had always been a mystery, a ghost even within his own family. He'd rejected everything modern life offered: banks, social security, the internet. He'd vanished into the Colorado wilderness years ago, surviving off the land, hunting, building, living in the margins of maps. Leah had barely thought of him since, but now his name echoed in her mind like a revelation. Jesse fit the puzzle in ways no one else could. The burner phone registered under the name Arthur Dent. The pings, deep in the Gunnison National Forest. The precise location Merrick had shown her. All of it aligned perfectly with the region Jesse was rumored to inhabit. The remoteness, the secrecy, the total absence of any digital trace. It was his signature. Leah's heart pounded as the weight of the possibility settled in. If Ryan had trusted Jesse with Anukika, then her daughter could be alive, hidden somewhere deep in those mountains, far from the reach of Novak and his syndicate. It would explain everything: the silence, the missing time, the elaborate deception. Ryan wasn't protecting himself, he was protecting her. The flicker of hope that had sparked in Leah's chest grew into a steady flame. For the first time in months, the path forward wasn't obscured by confusion. It was dangerous, yes, but it was clear. If Jesse Calloway was alive, and if he had her daughter, then Leah knew exactly where she had to go. To the mountains, to the wilderness where ghosts lived, to the one man who might hold the truth. Leah's hands clenched into fists at her sides as Merrick's words hung in the air like a verdict. No probable cause. The phrase echoed in her mind, hollow and cruel. Another bureaucratic wall standing between her and her daughter. She wanted to scream. Every instinct in her body told her they were close, so close. And yet the law demanded restraint, proof, patience. But patience was a luxury Leah no longer had. Merrick leaned forward, his tone softer now, the empathy in his eyes tempered by realism. I get it, Leah. I really do. But if we move too fast and we're wrong, we lose him, and we lose her. We need to do this by the book. His voice carried the weariness of a man who had seen too many desperate parents, too many false hopes. Leah nodded numbly, but her mind was already spinning, tracing the contours of the map in her imagination. The narrow roads that cut through the mountains, the small towns nestled in the valleys, the endless miles of forest that swallowed the horizon. Silver Creek. It wasn't just a dot on a map anymore. It was the last thread connecting her to Anukika. That night, sleep was impossible. Leah sat at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop screen casting pale light across the stacks of documents, printouts, and notes scattered before her. The P.O. box registration, the burner phone logs, the GPS pings from the Gunnison Range. Every piece pointed to the same place, the same man, Jesse Calloway. She replayed everything she knew about him, every scrap of memory Ryan had ever let slip. The way his voice had tightened when his brother's name came up, the quiet resentment buried beneath years of silence. Jesse was everything Ryan wasn't. Disciplined, self-reliant, incorruptible. But he was also volatile, distrustful of authority. A man who believed the world was a rigged game designed to destroy people like him. If Ryan had trusted anyone to hide Anukika, it would have been Jesse. And if Jesse believed he was protecting her, from the law, from criminals, from the world itself, then he would never let her go. By dawn, Leah had made her decision. She wasn't going to wait for warrants or jurisdictional approvals. She was done waiting for permission to save her child. She printed a map of the Gunnison National Forest, marking the coordinates of the burner phone pings, the town of Silver Creek, and the surrounding roads. She packed a small duffel with water, food, a flashlight, and a handgun. A relic from her father, one she had never imagined she'd need. As she drove west, the city faded behind her, replaced by winding mountain roads and the endless sprawl of pine forest. The higher she climbed, the thinner the air became. The more the world seemed to shrink into silence. Every turn of the wheel brought her closer to the truth, and closer to danger. By the time she reached the outskirts of Silver Creek, the sun was setting behind jagged peaks, the sky painted in bruised shades of orange and violet. The town was barely more than a cluster of aging buildings and a single gas station, the kind of place where strangers stood out. Leah parked on a quiet side street and took a steadying breath, her pulse hammering in her ears. Somewhere beyond those mountains, hidden beneath the vast canopy of trees, was her daughter, and the man who had taken her there. Leah tightened her grip on the map, her jaw set with grim determination. "Hang on, baby, She whispered. "I'm coming." Leah felt like the air in her apartment had been vacuumed out, every loose, painful fact snapping into a tighter, uglier picture. Ryan's frantic calls, the empty lockbox, the air tag under the floorboards, all of it pointing away from accident and toward something that had been planned. If he'd staged the wreck as a smokescreen to make the world think their daughter was gone, then the only person he could have trusted to hide her was the brother who'd vanished from civilization itself, Jesse Calloway, a ghost in family photographs who lived off the grid in the western ranges where cell service dies and people go to disappear. So Leah stopped pacing and set to work, hunting for proof. She spent hours combing public records and old addresses until one thread survived the sifting, a post office box in a mountain outpost called Silver Creek, registered long ago to Jesse, and, crucially, updated the year before Annie disappeared under the name Arthur Dent. The same alias that showed up on the burner phone pings Merrick had traced to a remote stretch of the Gunnison National Forest. Everything converged on that place, and where the law moved in patient circles, Leah felt only the relentless ticking of time. So she made a choice she'd never imagined making. She would stop waiting, stop hoping the system would move fast enough or brave enough to save her child. And she would go herself. She rented a nondescript four-wheel drive, packed layers, boots, a flashlight, a med kit, and the last of the divorce settlement in cash. A cold, ugly insurance policy. Printed maps and marked the burner phone coordinates. Rehearsed the questions she would force from anyone who looked like they'd ever known Jesse. And at first light drove west until the city's edge blurred and pines crowded the road. Feeling the change in her bones as asphalt gave way to gravel, and the world narrowed to a single point of purpose. Silver Creek was tiny and wary, a place where strangers were noticed and asked questions. But Leah's grief had turned into stubborn, practical rage. She parked on a side street as the sun bruised the ridgelines, tightened her hands on the steering wheel, and whispered to the quiet mountains, "Hold on, honey, I'm coming." Because the evidence, scarce and circumstantial as it was, had created one undeniable fact. If Jesse had Annie, she was alive and buried in the wilderness of western Colorado, a landscape that included the Gunnison National Forest, and Leah would do whatever it took to pull her back. Wikipedia +1. The postmaster's eyes narrowed, his suspicion immediate and unmasked. He leaned back slightly, crossing his arms, the wood of the counter creaking beneath his weight. "Arthur Dent, huh?" he repeated slowly, tasting the name like something unfamiliar. "Don't get many folks up here with names like that." Leah forced a small laugh, feigning nonchalance. "Yeah, he's a bit eccentric, writer type," she said, remembering the name's origin from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. "Last I heard, he was renting a cabin near here. He mentioned a P.O. box in Silver Creek, so I figured this was the place." The man studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment, his gaze sharp and assessing. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Finally, he shrugged, his tone deliberately casual. "We get a few folks renting boxes from time to time, mostly hunters, seasonal workers, people who don't like being found." Leah leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "So, you have heard of him?" The man's eyes flicked toward her, then away. "Can't say I have. And even if I did, box holders' info is private. Postal regs." His voice was flat, final. Leah nodded, masking her disappointment. "Of course I understand. Didn't mean to pry. I just—" She hesitated, letting vulnerability seep into her tone. "I'm worried about him. He's been through a lot. Just want to make sure he's okay." That softened something in the man's expression, if only slightly. He studied her again, this time not with suspicion but curiosity. "You said he's a friend?" "Yes," Leah said quietly. "Old friend of the family." He seemed to consider this, his jaw tightening. Then, as if deciding she wasn't a threat, he leaned forward and spoke in a low voice. "I don't know any Arthur Dent, but there's a guy who comes down from the hills every few weeks. Doesn't say much, pays cash, doesn't like being asked questions. If he's got a P.O. box, that'd be the one I'd guess." Leah's heart skipped. "Do you know where he lives?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of the postmaster's mouth, humorless and dry. "Lady, nobody knows where he lives. He shows up out of nowhere, usually early morning before the sun's up. Collects his mail, maybe buys a few supplies. Then he's gone again, like a ghost." Leah's pulse quickened. "When was the last time he came in?" The man thought for a moment. "Week and a half ago, maybe 2. Drove an old green pickup, beat to hell. Looked like he'd been through a war." Leah unfolded the map on the counter, her hand trembling slightly. "Do you know which direction he drives off?" The postmaster hesitated again, clearly torn between suspicion and the small-town instinct to share what little he knew. Finally, he sighed. "East, always east, toward the forest road past Miller's Ridge. That road'll take you into the back country, nothing but trees, rivers, and mountain lions out there." Leah smiled faintly, masking her growing dread. "Thank you. That helps a lot." The man nodded, but didn't smile back. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Miss, if your friend doesn't want to be found, you might want to leave him be. People who disappear into those woods usually have a reason." Leah paused, meeting his eyes. "So do I," she said softly. Then she folded the map, slipped it into her jacket, and stepped out into the cold mountain air. The wind had picked up, sharp and biting, carrying the scent of pine and snow. The mountains loomed ahead, dark and immense, a labyrinth of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Somewhere out there, hidden in that wilderness, was Jessie Calloway. And if Leah's theory was right, so was her daughter. She climbed into the Jeep, started the engine, and turned east toward Miller's Ridge. The last sliver of civilization disappeared in the rearview mirror. Leah's breath caught as Jessie unlocked the small metal door with a key, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. He retrieved a handful of mail, plain envelopes, nothing distinctive, and slipped them into the worn canvas bag slung over his shoulder. His posture was tense, alert, the wary stance of someone who lived his life expecting danger at every turn. He thanked the postmaster with a curt nod and turned toward the door. Leah sank lower in her seat, her pulse hammering in her ears. This was it, the ghost she'd been chasing for weeks, maybe months. He looked exactly like she remembered, the same quiet menace, the same cold composure that made him seem carved from the wilderness itself. But beneath that hardened exterior, she saw something else, a flicker of awareness, a man who carried secrets too heavy to share. As Jessie stepped onto the porch, the bell above the door chimed, a soft sound that sliced through the morning silence. He paused, scanning the street again, his eyes landing, briefly, unmistakably, on her Jeep. The contact was fleeting but electric. He knew. Somehow, he knew he was being watched. Leah's stomach dropped. He turned abruptly, heading toward the old pickup. Leah's mind raced. If she waited too long, she might lose him forever. If she acted too soon, she might scare him off, or worse, provoke him. She'd come this far, crossed every moral and legal line she'd ever lived by. There was no turning back now. The truck engine roared to life, a guttural sound echoing through the quiet town. Leah started her Jeep, the ignition clicking loudly in the stillness. She waited until he pulled onto the dirt road before following at a cautious distance, her tires crunching over gravel. The road wound east, climbing steadily into the mountains. Towering pines closed in on both sides, their shadows stretching long and dark across the narrow path. The farther they went, the rougher the terrain became. Leah kept her distance, staying just far enough behind that her headlights wouldn't be visible if he checked his mirrors. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Every bend in the road felt like a decision point. Pursue him deeper into the wilderness or turn back to the safety of reason. But reason was a luxury she no longer had. After nearly an hour of tense driving, the forest opened into a clearing, a small plateau overlooking a river far below. Jessie's truck slowed, then turned onto a barely visible path, almost swallowed by the undergrowth. Leah hesitated for only a second before following. Her heart pounded as the Jeep jolted over roots and rocks, branches scraping against the windows. Finally, through the trees, she saw it. A small cabin tucked against the slope of the mountain. Weathered wood. Smoke curling from a narrow chimney. A solar panel glinting faintly in the weak sunlight. It was secluded, nearly invisible from the road. The kind of place you could vanish in, live unbothered for years. Jessie parked his truck beside a stack of chopped firewood and climbed out, scanning the tree line once more before disappearing inside. Leah killed her engine, the silence swallowing her whole. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the cabin, every nerve in her body screaming. If she was right, if Anaka was inside, this was her chance. The moment she dreamed of and feared in equal measure. Leah took a deep breath, her trembling hand gripping the door handle. The mountain wind howled through the pines as she whispered to herself, "I'm coming, baby. Just hold on." Then she stepped out of the Jeep and started toward the cabin. Leah crouched low behind the tree line, her breath shallow, her pulse pounding so hard it felt deafening in her ears. The air was sharp and thin this high up in the mountains, each inhale burning her lungs, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the faint curve of the dirt drive that Jesse's truck had disappeared down. Somewhere beyond that ridge, beyond the heavy canopy of pine and the curtain of mist, was her daughter. She tightened her grip on the flashlight, resisting the urge to switch it on. The light would only give her away. The late afternoon sun was bleeding into the treetops, its orange glow fading fast. Soon the forest would be swallowed in shadow, and with it, her only chance of finding the truth tonight. Her sneakers crunched softly on the pine needles as she began to move, careful to keep to the edges of the path. The woods were alive with sound now, the distant murmur of running water, the rustle of branches, the soft crack of something unseen moving in the underbrush. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, to wait for Merrick and the police. But logic had no place here anymore. Every second wasted was another second Anaka remained in the hands of a man who'd vanished from society, and possibly from sanity. The dirt path curved sharply, climbing toward a ridge. Through the thinning trees, she caught her first glimpse of it. A cabin, small, weathered, built from rough-hewn logs darkened by time and smoke. Smoke curled from the chimney, faint but steady, a sign of life. A solar panel leaned precariously against the roof, catching the last of the sun's rays. And there, beside the cabin, parked under a makeshift lean-to, was Jesse's truck. Leah's breath hitched. This was it. She crouched behind a fallen log, observing. The windows of the cabin were covered with thick curtains, but the faint flicker of light inside betrayed a fire or lantern. A movement caught her eye. A figure stepping onto the porch. Jesse. He moved with the easy rhythm of someone who'd long since adapted to solitude, carrying a bucket of water from a nearby pump. He paused for a moment, scanning the tree line, his gaze sweeping dangerously close to where she crouched. Leah froze, every muscle taut. Then she heard it, a sound so faint she almost doubted it, high-pitched, melodic, fragile. A child's laugh. The world seemed to tilt, her body going cold with shock. It wasn't her imagination. She knew that laugh, the sound she'd replayed in her memory 1,000 times in the past year, the echo of innocence lost. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. Anaka was here. Alive. Tears blurred her vision. But beneath the wave of emotion came a razor-edged clarity. She couldn't rush in. She couldn't risk startling Jesse or frightening her daughter. She needed to know what kind of situation she was walking into. Was Anaka here willingly? Was she safe? Did Jesse know the police were closing in? Leah waited until Jesse disappeared inside, then circled wide, moving silently through the trees until she reached the back of the cabin. The small window there was cracked open, a sliver of light spilling through. She crept closer, her palms slick with sweat, and peered inside. Her breath caught. There was a small table cluttered with canned food, a lantern, and what looked like a stack of coloring books. Crayons scattered across the wood. And in the corner, sitting cross-legged on a threadbare rug, was a little girl with tangled blonde hair, wearing pink socks that were a size too small. She was humming softly to herself as she arranged toy animals in neat rows. It was her. Leah's knees gave out, her body shaking with the force of relief and disbelief. Her baby was alive. Then Jesse entered the room. He knelt beside the girl, speaking softly, his expression unreadable but not cruel. He brushed her hair from her face, murmuring something Leah couldn't hear. Anaka looked up at him, her smile faint but genuine. Leah felt her heart twist. Whatever had happened over the past year, Jesse hadn't hurt her, but he was hiding her, keeping her from her mother, from the world. The question that haunted her now wasn't if she'd found her daughter. It was how she was going to get her back. And as the last light faded from the mountains, Leah realized something chilling. Jesse wasn't just protecting Anaka from Ryan or the criminals. From the way his eyes flicked toward the window, scanning the darkness as though he sensed her presence, he was protecting her from someone else. maybe even from Leah herself. Leah moved like a shadow. Through the thinning trees, the mountain air biting her lungs, every sense stretched taut. The cabin she'd been stalking revealed itself in a small clearing. Dark, stubborn logs, seasoned by years of wind and smoke. A narrow porch and small windows that reflected the dying light. And for a long moment, she simply watched, counting exits and scanning for tiny signs of life, until her eyes locked on the kitchen window where an oil lamp glowed and a box of bright children's cereal lay on the counter like a neon flag of proof. Taped to the old refrigerator was a crayon drawing, naive strokes, a yellow sun, a crooked blue bird, and a cabin in the woods that punched the air from her lungs. Anukika had drawn it. Her child was in that room. Relief crashed into Leah so violently she had to steady herself against a tree. Tears, hot and sudden, then sharpened into focus, because relief without a plan would be a trap. Jesse's rifle rack by the door told her everything she didn't want to admit. This man was not only capable of disappearing, he was armed, prepared, a loner who had made the wilderness his fortress. So Leah methodically mapped the cabin in her head, noting the porch, the rear window with its cracked pane, the narrow side opening that might let in a child but not an adult without making noise. She circled once, silent as a hunted thing, and found the small ventilation window half ajar, just big enough for a little body and a thin arm to slip through, and decided to wait for nightfall, understanding that darkness would both hide her approach and sharpen Jesse's paranoia, that she would need to coax her daughter toward freedom without turning rescue into battle, because a confrontation with a man who believed the government and the world had betrayed him would almost certainly end in violence. So she retreated into the trees to watch, heart hammering, palms numb around the flashlight, listening to the cabin's faint domestic noises, cup against saucer, low humming, Jesse's muffled voice to a child, each ordinary sound a lifeline and a danger, knowing she had crossed the line from stunned mother into active seeker, that every decision now could save or doom the little girl who'd been hidden in plain sight. And as the light surrendered to dusk, Leah rehearsed the fragile, furious plan she would use to take back her daughter. Wikipedia.org for a long, breathless second. Anukika didn't move. The little girl's wide eyes darted toward the closed bedroom door, her tiny hands clutching the quilt as though it were a shield. Leah could see the war behind those frightened eyes, loyalty to the uncle who'd cared for her, fear of the man's rules, confusion over the lies she'd been told. Leah kept her voice soft, steady, the way she used to speak when calming her after a nightmare. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's right here. You didn't do anything wrong. We just have to be very quiet, okay? You can tell me everything later. But right now, we have to go." The girl hesitated, her lip trembling. Then, with a small nod, she pushed aside the quilt. Leah's heart nearly burst at the sight of her, thinner than she remembered, her blonde hair longer and tangled, her pink socks faded from wear. Anukika swung her legs off the cot, her bare feet touching the cold wood floor. "Good girl," Leah whispered. "Come on, baby. Just climb up. I'll catch you." She reached through the narrow window, her fingers brushing against her daughter's small, trembling hand. The touch nearly undid her, a year of grief and searching condensed into that single, fragile contact. Anukika placed one knee on the chair beneath the window, gripping the sill with both hands. Leah steadied her, guiding her through the narrow opening. The window frame groaned, a low, dry creak that sliced through the stillness. Leah froze. Inside the cabin, a floorboard shifted. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Come on, sweetheart. Now," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Anukika wriggled forward, the hem of her nightgown catching on the frame. Leah tugged gently, careful not to pull too hard, until the child slipped free into her arms. The moment her daughter's weight settled against her chest, Leah nearly collapsed. She clutched the girl close, her face buried in the tangle of her hair, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and sleep. "Mommy's got you," she whispered. tears choking her voice. "I've got you, baby." From inside the cabin came another sound, louder this time. A door opening. "Annie?" Jesse's voice, rough and alert, cut through the night. Leah's heart stopped. She scooped Anukika into her arms, the girl clinging instinctively around her neck, and turned toward the woods. "Hold on tight," she whispered. Then she ran. The cold air tore at her lungs as she sprinted through the trees, branches whipping against her face, the forest floor uneven beneath her boots. Behind her, the cabin door slammed open. "Stop!" Jesse's voice bellowed into the darkness. A light flicked on, a blinding beam sweeping across the clearing. Leah ducked low, weaving through the trees, her only thought to put distance between them, to keep her daughter safe. "Mommy, I'm scared," Anukika whimpered, her small voice muffled against Leah's shoulder. "I know, baby, I know. Just hold on. We're almost there." A gunshot cracked through the night. The sound echoed off the mountain walls, sending birds exploding from the treetops. Leah's breath hitched, her body jerking instinctively, but she didn't stop running. Not now. Not when freedom was so close she could taste it, sharp and electric like the cold air burning in her chest. She didn't know if Jesse was shooting to scare her or to stop her. All she knew was that she wasn't losing her daughter again. Not tonight. Not ever. Leah's breath came in ragged bursts, her arms instinctively spread in front of Anukika, as if her body alone could block the rifle's aim. The cold light burned against her eyes, flattening the world into hard edges. Jesse's outline, the glint of metal, the animal's teeth flashing white as it barked at the dark. She forced herself to speak slowly, clearly, fighting to steady her voice. "Jesse, please, listen to me. Ryan wasn't protecting her. He was hiding her. He lied to both of us. He took her because he owed dangerous people money. I have proof." The words hung in the air, swallowed by the dog's growls. Jesse's jaw tightened. "Proof?" he barked. "All I've seen are your kind of lies. Paper, lawyers, courts. Ryan showed me the reports, the hospital letters. You were unstable. You disappeared for months." "That's not true," she said, her voice cracking. "He forged those. He needed you to believe I was the threat so you'd hide her for him. Ask yourself, does this feel right? Keeping a child locked in the woods, never letting her see her friends, her school. Does that sound like protection?" For the first time, Jesse faltered. His grip on the rifle wavered just slightly, confusion cutting through the fury. His gaze flicked toward Anukika, who stood trembling behind Leah, her small hand gripping her mother's jacket. "Uncle Jesse," she whimpered. "Mommy's not sick. She found me. She said Daddy lied." The sound of her voice, the tiny, trembling truth of it, hit him harder than any argument Leah could make. His expression cracked, the wildness in his eyes dimming. But years of paranoia, isolation, and guilt kept him frozen in place, trapped between two versions of reality. "Jesse," Leah pressed, her words sharp with emotion. "If you fire that gun, you'll prove Ryan was right about you, that you're a man who doesn't think, who obeys fear instead of love. You helped him once. Don't finish his lie tonight, please." The wind moaned through the trees, carrying the smell of gunpowder and pine. For a moment, no one moved. The dog gave a final bark, then fell silent, sensing its master's hesitation. Jesse's breathing slowed. His eyes darted between Leah and the child, his chest rising and falling like a man drowning in memories he couldn't escape. Finally, the rifle dipped. The metal scraped softly as it lowered toward the ground. His voice, when it came, was broken, stripped of its rage. He said they'd kill her if anyone found out." Leah took a tentative step forward, keeping her hands raised. "And they almost did. But I found who he owed. I found everything. You don't have to protect him anymore. Just let me take her home." Jesse's eyes glistened in the harsh light. For a long moment, he looked at Anukika, the only piece of family he had left, and then he nodded, slow and deliberate. The rifle clattered softly to the ground. "Take her," he whispered. "But go now, before someone else finds this place. They've been here before. Leah didn't wait for him to change his mind. She scooped Anukika into her arms, backing away toward the tree line, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Behind her, the dog whined, confused, and Jesse stood unmoving in the floodlight's glow, half guardian, half ghost, watching them vanish into the darkness he'd once sworn would keep them safe. The dog's growl rumbled low and dangerous, its body tense like a drawn bowstring. Leah didn't flinch. Her heart hammered so violently she could feel it in her throat, but she kept her eyes locked on Jesse's. The rifle gleamed in his trembling hands, the barrel unwavering yet uncertain. This was the moment. If she couldn't reach him now, everything would end here. "Ryan is in massive debt," Leah said, her voice raw and cutting through the cold air. "He owes money to dangerous men, Jesse, real criminals. Victor Novak. They threatened to take Anaka if he didn't pay. That's why he ran. That's why he made her disappear." Jesse's expression flickered, confusion cracking through his hardened exterior. His grip on the rifle loosened just slightly. "That's not what he told me," he muttered. His voice was thin, uncertain. "He said you were unstable, that you tried to hurt her, that I was crazy?" Leah cut in, her tone sharp, desperate. "That's what he needed you to believe. He couldn't tell you the truth because then you'd realize he dragged you into his mess. He used you, Jesse. He made you think you were saving her when really you were hiding her from the men who were after him." Her words hit like a sledgehammer, sharp and unrelenting. She saw the doubt bloom in his eyes, the way they darted, searching for something to hold on to, for a truth that wouldn't destroy him. But Leah didn't stop. The floodgate was open. "He staged the car crash," she pressed on. "He faked the amnesia. He made you believe he couldn't remember because he didn't want you, or the police, to connect him to the threats. The burner phone you used to talk to him? It was registered to Arthur Dent. The P.O. box here in Silver Creek? Same fake name. He sent money through it. Your name on the lease, your fingerprints on the box. He tied you to it, you and my daughter." Jesse's jaw tightened. He swallowed hard, his throat working as the pieces fell into place. The inconsistencies in Ryan's story, the late-night calls, the urgency, the strange instructions, all of it suddenly made sense. The reality hit him like a physical blow. He'd been used. Leah's voice softened, trembling. "He knew you'd protect her. You always did. You've been living out here, afraid, watching the woods like a soldier, waiting for something that was never real. Ryan built this prison around you, Jesse, and he trapped my daughter inside it." The words hung heavy in the frozen air. Anukika clung to Leah's leg, her tiny frame shaking. "Uncle Jesse," she whispered through tears. "Mommy's not sick. She found me. Please don't hurt her." That broke him. Jesse's face crumpled, the fury draining out of him as his gaze met the child's trembling eyes. The rifle in his hands felt suddenly monstrous, alien. He lowered it slowly, his breathing uneven. The dog whimpered, pacing beside him as if sensing its master's collapse. The night seemed to hold its breath. Then Jesse spoke, his voice small, hollow, defeated. "He said they'd come for her if anyone found out." Leah nodded, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. "And they will if we don't leave now. But it's not too late. You can still help her. Help us." Jesse stared at her, his expression hollowed by realization. The isolation, the fear, the loyalty, it had all been for nothing. Slowly, he turned the rifle in his hands, letting it drop into the snow with a dull thud. "Go," he whispered. "Take her and go, before they find you." For a moment, Leah hesitated, studying him, the broken man who'd once tried to be a protector and ended up a prisoner of his brother's lies. Then she reached for Anukika's hand. "Thank you," she said softly. Jesse didn't respond. He turned and walked back toward the cabin, the dog padding silently behind him, the light casting his figure into a fading silhouette. Leah held her daughter close, heart pounding as she backed into the shadows of the forest. Behind her, the cabin's light flickered once, then went dark, swallowed by the wilderness, leaving only the echo of his voice lingering in the trees. ChatGPT said he didn't look back. Jesse vanished into the black expanse of the forest, swallowed by the shadows of the mountains, a ghost returning to his solitude. Leah stood frozen for only a second, the echo of his footsteps dissolving into the night. Then she grabbed Anukika's hand and ran. The cold air sliced against her face, branches whipped at her arms, but she didn't feel any of it. Adrenaline carried her forward, the single thought pulsing through her mind. She had her daughter back. They didn't stop until the SUV emerged from the darkness like a lifeline. Leah's hands shook uncontrollably as she jammed the key into the lock. The metal was freezing against her fingers, slick with sweat. She shoved Anukika into the passenger seat and scrambled into the driver's side, slamming the door shut. The sharp click of the lock sounded like salvation. She started the engine, the headlights cutting through the darkness, and drove. The wheels skidded on loose gravel, the vehicle bouncing violently as it tore down the mountain road. Leah's heart pounded, her eyes flicking to the mirror again and again, half expecting to see headlights cresting the ridge behind them. But the road stayed empty. The forest swallowed the past in silence. The drive blurred into a fever dream of headlights, cold, wind, and the quiet sobs of a child. Anukika's crying broke Leah's heart in ways words couldn't describe. Small, fragile sounds of confusion and fear. Leah reached across the console, stroking her daughter's hair. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, voice trembling. "You're safe now. Mommy's here. I've got you." The repetition was both comfort and promise, an anchor holding them to the moment, as the wilderness receded behind them. Hours later, a single flicker of signal appeared on her phone screen, bars of light piercing the darkness like hope itself. Civilization. The soft glow of a small mountain town came into view, lights shimmering through the trees. Leah drove straight to the sheriff's office, the building's floodlights bathing the parking lot in sterile brightness. She stumbled inside with Anukika clinging to her side, both of them trembling and exhausted. The sheriff, a weathered man with kind eyes and steady composure, listened intently as Leah spilled everything: the crash, the lies, the hidden cabin in the Gunnison Mountains. His expression darkened with understanding. The name Annika Harding wasn't unfamiliar. It was a case that had haunted law enforcement for over a year, a little girl whose face had become a symbol of loss and unanswered questions. Within hours, the news spread like wildfire. The missing child found alive. The impossible miracle. At the hospital, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights replaced the cold silence of the wilderness. Doctors examined Anukika carefully, their expressions softening with cautious relief. She was healthy, thin, frightened, but unharmed. A miracle in flesh and bone. Yet Leah could see the invisible scars, the way her daughter clung to her sleeve, the way her eyes darted nervously toward the door whenever someone new entered. The year of fear and manipulation had left its mark. Leah held her close, the child's heartbeat pressed against her chest, the warmth grounding her in the present. The terror of the past year began to loosen its grip. The ache, the emptiness that had consumed her life, finally gave way to something fierce and bright: purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rebuilding. For both of them. By morning, a convoy of tactical teams descended on the remote cabin. The thunder of helicopter rotors shattered the stillness of the mountains. The wilderness that had hidden secrets for so long was now flooded with flashing lights and shouts. But there was no resistance. Jesse Calloway was sitting on the porch when they arrived, the rifle laid across his lap, his expression hollow. He didn't fight, didn't run. He simply looked up as the officers surrounded him, the weight of everything reflected in his empty stare. "She's safe," he murmured, almost to himself. That's all that matters. And as Leah held Anukika in her arms miles away, Watching the first pale light of dawn spill across the horizon, she knew that for the first time in a long time, it was true. The nightmare was over, but the story, the healing, the reckoning, was only just beginning. Jesse Calloway surrendered without a struggle. There was no defiance left in him, only exhaustion, resignation, and the crushing weight of guilt. As officers cuffed his hands, he spoke quietly, almost in relief, confessing to everything. He told them how Ryan had shown up a year earlier, frantic and unhinged, spinning a story about Leah's instability and the danger he claimed she posed to her own child. Jesse believed him. He'd thought he was saving his niece, not helping to hide her. His remorse was raw, the realization of how deeply he'd been manipulated cutting deeper than any punishment the law could hand down. The news of Anukika's recovery exploded across the state. Camera crews descended on the quiet mountain town, reporters broadcasting live from the shadow of the Rockies. Headlines blared, "Missing girl found alive after year in wilderness." The nation watched as the truth unraveled in real time, a story of lies, betrayal, and a mother's relentless search. When police arrested Ryan Harding at the assisted living facility, the mask of the grieving father fell away. Gone was the frail man lost in the fog of supposed amnesia. What remained was a desperate, cornered man whose web of lies had finally collapsed. Faced with Jesse's confession and the living proof of his daughter's survival, Ryan's entire defense crumbled. The amnesia that had once shielded him now looked like what it always was, a carefully calculated performance. The full truth spilled out piece by piece, each detail darker than the last. Ryan's gambling debts had spiraled beyond his control. When violent enforcers like Victor Novak began circling, threatening his daughter's life, Ryan devised a reckless, self-serving plan. He took money he'd hidden from Leah, staged the car crash, and delivered Anukika to his estranged brother in the mountains, painting Leah as a danger and himself as a victim. In his mind, if everyone believed Anukika was gone, the criminals would lose their leverage, and he could disappear with the money once the storm passed. But it was the smallest mistake, the forgotten backpack left in the crawl space of their home, that unraveled his entire deception, the very detail that betrayed him. He injured himself more severely than intended during the crash, the pain feeding the illusion of trauma-induced amnesia. For a year he clung to the lie, waiting for the danger to fade, never realizing that his deceit had destroyed everyone he claimed to love. By late 2022, the justice system moved swiftly. In a crowded courtroom heavy with silence, Ryan Harding pleaded guilty to multiple charges: custodial interference, filing false reports, and child endangerment. The man who once manipulated everyone around him finally faced the weight of his own choices. Jesse Calloway, having cooperated fully with investigators, received leniency. His genuine remorse and the fact that he'd believed he was protecting his niece spared him prison. Instead, he was sentenced to probation and community service, a quiet penance for a man who had already been punished by his conscience. Leah and Anukika left Colorado soon after. They settled in a quiet coastal town where the air smelled of salt and the horizon promised peace instead of pain. Therapy became their lifeline. Slow, grueling, but transformative. Leah learned to breathe again. Anukika began to laugh again. The nightmares faded with time, replaced by the small joys of normalcy. A morning breakfast together, a bedtime story, the sound of her daughter's voice echoing through the house. For Leah, the journey from loss to redemption had been carved through hell itself, but she emerged stronger, anchored by the one unshakable truth that had carried her through the darkness, the strength of a mother's love. And in quiet moments, when the world felt still, she sometimes thought back to the moment it had all changed, the faint digital ping on a forgotten map, the 9-foot signal that had led her through chaos and into the light. In the end, the truth shattered everything, but it also set them free. Ryan Harding's lies collapsed under the weight of one mother's love, and after a year in the wilderness, Anukika was finally home. For Leah, The fight wasn't just about finding her daughter. It was about reclaiming their lives from the darkness that almost destroyed them. And sometimes, it only takes one small signal, one tiny clue, to lead you out of the shadows. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in the power of hope, and let us know in the comments. What would you do if it were your child? Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life mysteries and emotional true stories every week.